everybody, Mr. Garvey here, and this is the recap video for Mind Blowing Mondays number 7 on vocabulary of function types. And really what this is just like reminding you about different types of functions you should be able to recognize based on an equation, a table, and a graph. Cool. So I'm just going to run through like the different multiple choice options because these are all types of functions that we're going to study in the class and that you should be familiar with. First is an absolute value function. Okay. How do you know an equation has an absolute value in it? It's got absolute value bars. Those are what those vertical lines are. So if you see an equation, it's got some x's going on, blah, 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 and it's got absolute value bars. It's an absolute value equation. We're not talking about how to solve these equations all right now. I'm just making sure you can identify them. What does a graph of an absolute value look like? It's a V-shaped graph. Okay, that's what people remember. It's a V-shaped graph, not U-shaped, V-shaped. If you're looking at a table, something you might notice with an absolute value graph is it might go down and then go back up because of that V shape. Okay, and when it goes down and goes back up, it goes down the same amount every time. And it goes up the same amount every time because it's lines. Absolute value is made up of two lines. Yeah, that's what makes it V-shaped. Next, square root graph. You guys know an equation with square root. It's just there's an equation with a square root in it. Check. Graphically, square root functions look like this. I forgot to do the sound effect. Let me do that again. There we go. Okay. Let me actually go more like that. Keep in mind that there's transformations, so it might not look like that. It might be moved up and look like that. It might be flipped upside down and look like that. That's how I made one of the questions. Or it might be reflected over the y-axis and look like that. What does the table for a square root graph look like? Don't really worry about that. Okay. Some of these are not things I'm going to expect to be able to do. So let's quadratic. Quadratic means it has a squared in it. Okay, it means there's an x squared. The ones that get a little tricky, here's a classic quadratic. The ones that get a little tricky, maybe it's something that's written like this, where you actually don't see the x squared, but you know it's there. So if you did a little aluminum foil, you'd end up with an equation with an x squared there. Okay, those are quadratic equations. Graphically, quadratic. The graph is a parabola. Okay, kids get these two words confused. You call the functions quadratic. The shape of a quadratic, when you graph a quadratic function, the shape of the graph is a parabola. And what's a parabola? It's a U-shaped graph. Okay, something like that. Again, it could be reflected or shifted various different ways. In fact, the parent one y equals x squared looks like that, kind of the standard one. Again, your table here would go down and then up. It's not going to go down and then up evenly. This is a little technical. I don't necessarily worry about it. But if you look at this compared to the absolute value, this is going down and then up, but it's not going down the same amount. It's going down 3 and then down 1 and then up 1 and then up. So quadratics do something like that. Cubic. This one you guys might not have been as familiar with. Cubic means cubed, so the third power. So an equation that's cubic has x cubed in it. Okay. It might also have x squareds and x's, but it's got to have a cubed to make it cubic. Okay, don't worry about the table for that. Graphically, these ones are a little tricky. It basically looks like a parabola, but with only half of it, and then the other half turns down. Okay. Cool. I would like you to know what that graph looks like. Again, could be reflected, shifted, whatever. Next one, linear. What's linear? You guys know what linear means. It's linear. It's a line. It's a line. It's a line. It's a line. How do you know an equation is linear? It has x's in it, but like nothing else. Okay, there's no exponents of any type. There's just other numbers. Okay, it's a linear equation. How do you know a table? This is important. You should be able to look at a table and tell that it's linear. It's going up or down the same amount. Doesn't matter what that amount is, but it better be going up or down the same amount. Okay, this is a table that is linear because it is going down 2 every time. What is that amount that's going down every time called? Slope. It's called the slope. It's called the slope. Yeah, we'll talk about that, but that's an example of a linear table. What does a linear graph look like? It looks like a line. It's a line. Cool. Linear means line. Hypoallergenic. I think a lot of you guys missed this one. You may or may not have learned this in your other math class, but hypoallergenic is dogs that don't shed. So you really should know all these different dogs. Okay, these are all exponential. Last one here. I think it's the last one. Check. Yeah. Exponential means exponent, but be careful. Exponential equations have an exponent, but they have x as the exponent. Okay? Sometimes people get confused and they look at an equation like this and they say, oh, yeah, it's got an exponent, it's exponential. And I'm like, no. It has to have the x as the exponent. It has to have a variable as the exponent. So this is an exponential graph. It has an x in the exponent. Exponential tables, I generally, well, I'll say a thing. We'll obviously study this a lot more, but they follow a pattern where instead of going up by the same amount as in adding or subtracting the same amount, they multiply by the same amount. Okay, so you might see something like this. That's my mental math there. So if you looked at this table, you'd say, oh, it's times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, and that would be an exponential table. Yeah, and we'll study this a lot more. The graph, you must know this. What does an exponential graph look like? It's like a rocket ship. It's going, and it's shooting up. It's shooting up super steep and really fast, generally. There's also an important feature, which is there's this horizontal line that the exponential graph never touches. That is called a horizontal asymptote. Okay, I hope that word somewhat familiar. We will talk about various functions that have asymptotes in this class. Again, you don't need to you should definitely know the graphs and the equations. Some of these tables are a little weird for some of these functions, but definitely know the graphs and the equations. You should be able to look at this equation and say it's linear, and the graph's going to look like this if you graph a linear function. Cool. Same with these other ones. All right. Thanks for watching. That concludes this video.